Hi, everyone. I'm Christine DiLeone. I am the district parish nurse rep for New England. I'm also a clinical professor at the University of Connecticut School of Nursing. I've been teaching for about 3 years now, and I'm also a PhD student at the University of Connecticut. So thanks for listening to me today. I am here because I want to share this story with you of my experiences with my mom with Alzheimer's. I did write this story. Let me just kind of show you. Here we go. Called Dear Healthcare Professionals Taking Care of My Mom with Alzheimer's Disease. Excuse me. I wrote this story for a couple of reasons. One, because I wanted the people taking care of my mother in the assisted living and the nursing home to know that I see them and I appreciate all that they're doing as healthcare professionals to care for somebody with Alzheimer's, especially my mom. I also wrote the story because I wanted caregivers and those in contact with caregivers to have something that they could relate to and to have some hope for their loved one with Alzheimer's. So the story is on the LCMS Parish Nurse website. There is an e-version of it. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, it is available to you. So yeah, let's get started. So I really liked Maria Shriver's quote about Alzheimer's because it really kind of tells the story. She said, no matter where you are, what you've accomplished, or what your financial situation is, when you're dealing with a parent with Alzheimer's, you yourself feel helpless. The parent can't work, they can't live alone, they're totally dependent like a toddler. And as the disease unfolds, you don't know what to expect. It's so true. You just have no idea what this journey, where it's going to lead you as a caregiver. Because everybody progresses differently with this disease. There's really no way to say, okay, in 6 months this will happen, and in a year this will happen. Everybody's so different with the way they progress and the behaviors they exhibit. So you feel really, really helpless. And I still feel helpless even after 10 years. So just some background history on my mother. She is one of 15 children. She grew up on a farm in upstate New York. Her mother, we now believe, had Alzheimer's. Of course, at that time, everybody thought she was crazy, my grandmother. But she is one of 6 to 7 siblings who currently have Alzheimer's or have passed away with it. So I'm going to start you on my journey here with my mom. So we always knew that Alzheimer's was there. It was in our family. My aunt wasn't the first one to go into a nursing home with it. It just was kind of always there in the background. And you always kind of wondered what was going to happen to the rest of the siblings. So then it happened to us with my mom. So my brother lived with her at the time, and things started happening like she would forget real estate appointments. My mom had a real estate business, a very successful real estate business. So she would forget appointments. And then her staff were telling me things like she was forgetting to write very important information on legal documents. And there was a lot of concern with how she was performing at her job. So, that always puts a knot in your stomach because, again, the Alzheimer's is there. It's always in the background. So I had my brother bring my mother to her primary care doctor. I had a whole list of things I wanted him to rule out because I didn't want him to say Alzheimer's. So I had things like a B12 deficiency, thyroid, stress, depression, a whole list. So he did check up for all those things, and unfortunately, it was none of those things, and he did diagnose her with Alzheimer's. So that's like a real slap in your face, I guess, so to speak, for another lack of another way to put that, because Now your whole world stops. Now you have your mother, who my mother and I were buds. Like, we did everything together. We shopped together. So my mom and I did a lot of things together. She would think nothing of hopping in her car and driving to Connecticut from New York, a 3 hour ride to see my kids for the weekend, or to take them to Toys R Us. We always did lots of shopping together. We went on trips to Disney World very frequently with my boys. So now everything is just kind of stops, and you don't know what to do, and you're not sure what decisions you need to make. But yet, I'm the medical person in the family, so I'm supposed to know everything, right? Um, it was very hard for me as a medical person because I'm in my own grief because I'm losing my mother. But yet I need to put that aside and make decisions for her. So she lived with my brother for a while, but my brother was also getting remarried, so he had plans to move out. Um, so we did decide that we would move my mother to Connecticut to live with me. And at the time, my boys were 10 and 15. I was working full time as a home care nurse, a cardiac home care nurse, and I was also in school getting my master's. So I took that on. We moved her in with me. We packed up her house and drove in a U-Haul, me and my mom, from New York to Connecticut. We made a bedroom for her at my home. So we got her here, and it really started off okay. It was a big adjustment for her. We tried to keep her active. She always liked to clean or do things outside. So for a little bit, she was okay. But then she started exhibiting paranoia and delusions. She would do things like call her brother in New York and say, my neighbor doesn't want her here, or my father-in-law said he doesn't want her there, and she needed to move back. There was one point where she was talking on the phone and nobody was there. So this was very concerning, though it's very normal actually in the disease process. So I was able to get her to a psychiatrist um, who specializes in Alzheimer's disease, and we had her tested. They did a lot of cognitive testing, and they also got her started on an antipsychotic medication and an antidepressant, which was very, very helpful. So, but during the 5 months that mom was with me, it was very stressful for me, as you can imagine, with all that I had going on and bringing her to doctor's appointments and making sure that she was eating, making sure she was bathing, things like that. So, honestly, I had a lot of anxiety, tons and tons of anxiety that I'd never had before in my life. So, I did make a difficult decision to move my mother back to New York into an assisted living. I just felt at the time that she was familiar with those surroundings. That was her home. That's where she grew up. That's all she knew her whole life. Um, so I thought it was the best decision. So one cold February, my husband and I and my boys packed up her stuff into another U-Haul, and we moved her into an assisted living. That didn't really go so well. She was bored. Every time I called her, that's all I heard was, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. There really wasn't a lot of activities there at the time, though a lot of the family were visiting her, so that was helpful. She was in assisted living for about 2 years, and I just want to kind of share with you some of the things I experienced while she was in the assisted living. And I tell you these things not because my story is special or unique, but because you may see that a lot of the things I tell you about my story, you may see in some of your members, or they may be experiencing as well. So again, just so you have a better idea of what a family member goes through with this disease. So in the assisted living, so she was on the antipsychotic medication. And I got a phone call from them one day telling me that they found 3 boxes, meaning 3 months worth of her antipsychotic medication sitting in the med cart, not given to her. That's a long time. So, and the medication was signed off on by the medication techs. They didn't have nursing staff at this assisted living. They were medication technicians. And the technicians were the ones that passed out the medication. So what was I to do with that information? That was very concerning. So I did call the state Department of Public Health, and I did file a complaint. It's interesting when you're a nurse, you are like, oh my gosh, the state's coming in. And everybody starts to freak out a little bit, and everything's perfect for when the state comes. But as a family member, the state is your friend. They're your advocates. When you have a family member in an assisted living or a nursing home, honestly, they're the people you want on your side because they're the ones who know the rules and how things should go, and they can advocate for you. So out of that situation, there was an employee that was fired, and lots of re-education was done. That's one situation that happened in the assisted living. And then my mother started wandering. She was found, the last wandering episode, she was found outside of the facility with some of her belongings in her hands. And when the staff went out to get her, she said that she was going home. She needed to go home. She probably was wandering about 3 times before that last incident, and that was the final straw. So now her safety is a concern. You know, what's going to happen? She's going to be found. There's going to be a silver alert out for her next, you know. So I felt the need to have her moved into long-term care. And it was a little different in New York. You had to have like a home care nurse come out and do an evaluation for that to happen. So that happened, and she was approved, I guess, so to speak, to be moved into a nursing home. So we packed up her stuff again. We had my aunt bring her to her brother's home to visit, and we moved all of her stuff. And it was actually right next door. It was the buildings were connected. So one side was assisted living, and one side was long-term care. So now this move was harder for me because I felt like it was just so permanent. I think, you know, in the assisted living, she had more freedom. I don't know, it felt very different. But honestly, it went very well. I literally, when my mom got back from her visit with my uncle, went and told her that she had a new room. And I walked her up to her room, and she loved it. She had her own room. It was a private room. So we had it fixed up really cute. So yeah, that move went really, really well. As difficult as it was for me, it went well. So now mom is in the moderate stages of the disease, right? So she's out of the early stages and she's progressed into the moderate stage. So she does need more help. You know, she can't be on her own. So she does need some help with bathing, a little bit of help with dressing. She still can walk and talk and participate in activities. The good thing about this floor was they were geared towards dementia patients. So they did have a really good activities department. So I will also share with you that when she moved into the long-term care facility, shortly after that, her sister had a fall at home and was exhibiting signs of Alzheimer's, and they moved her from rehab into long-term care. And my aunt ended up being across the hall from my mother. So now there's 2 sisters on one floor, and then there's my aunt, who was the first diagnosed, on another floor. So there's 3 sisters now in this one long-term care facility. So it was good. It was a good environment because my mom got to gab with her sister quite a bit, and they got to talk about the old days, which was great, right? Because typically the long-term memory is the last to leave. so they could talk about their days on the farm and their kids. And it was really a nice situation as far as long-term care situations go, honestly. But then my mother started exhibiting behaviors, I guess, towards men, which was, we have to laugh about it now because she was divorced and never wanted to remarry. She never wanted a man. She had lots of chances, but never pursued it. So, but now she's in the nursing home and she really likes men and she's kissing men. And she was found in a room with a man, with one of the male patients. And I think his pants were unzipped, actually. Something was funky about that. So these behaviors were going on, and I knew about them. And the staff was doing things like they put an alarm on her door. So whenever she walked in and out of her room, that was a heads up to them, where is she going and who is she going to be around and, which patient is she going to go to. And that worked very well. And then one day, it was Christmas Eve, actually. I shouldn't say one day because it was a very significant day, 3 years ago. I get a call from the administrator at the nursing home telling me that my mother was now a danger to other patients and she was going to be moved from the third floor upstairs to the fifth floor where my other aunt was, and that they were moving her in 30 minutes. And I certainly attempted to sway his decision, I asked him to wait till the next day because it was a 3 hour ride up for me. Nothing I said mattered. And he literally said to me, "We are moving your mom in 30 minutes, like it or not. Merry Christmas." And he hung the phone up on me. So you can't even imagine, I guess, what this was like, that my mother was going to be whisked off her environment that she had already known into this new environment. My aunt at this point was in the end stages and she was nonverbal. So it wasn't like she could be with her other sister. So that was a really, really tough thing. I was here in Connecticut and already had plans to be with my husband's family for Christmas. So luckily, my brothers were able to go there and be with her a little bit to help her transition to this new environment. But honestly, it was pretty horrible. I can't even make anything good come out of that. It was pretty horrible. It was very disruptive to my mother and very, very hard for her. They moved her into one room with one woman who was yelling a lot, and then they moved her 2 days later into the room with my aunt. So it was a horrible, horrible move. So again, I called the state and filed a complaint. Well, actually, you can do it online now. So as a result of that, again, they advocated for me. They know the rules. I didn't know that the nursing home was supposed to give me 24 hours notice before a move like that was made, and they did not. So they were fined a pretty good chunk of money and reprimanded for that incident as well. So, then my mother now, in the last year, has been now diagnosed in the end stages of Alzheimer's. So she went from seeing a neurologist every 6 months just to kind of monitor her progress and her medications to the neurologist now saying, I don't need to see her anymore. There's nothing I can do. So that's tough to hear. That's really tough to hear. You're constantly, honestly, in and out of many stages of grief throughout this whole process. Because little by little, through each stage of the disease, you're losing another part of this person that you love so much. And you're losing another part of this relationship. So I feel like for 10 years, I've been in and out of different stages of grief as the disease has progressed. So now she's in she's in the end stages. She has a lot of chronic back pain. And it's very difficult for the staff to judge her pain, and where it is and how well, she can tell them where the pain is because she's still verbal, but to judge how bad the pain is. Um, so I've worked very closely with the nurse practitioner at the nursing home to regulate her pain medication, and I've also gotten her an essential oil cream to put on her back. That's really helped a lot. So pain has been an issue for her. She still likes the men. She still likes to kiss the men. But I think at this point, they've just accepted how she is, and they just try and redirect her. I've spent a lot of time on the phone with the nurses and the aides. Speaking of redirecting, giving them tips on how to redirect my mother, and because honestly, based on my clinical observations as an instructor when I was teaching clinicals with nursing students, my own experiences and what I've experienced from the staff in the assisted living and the nursing home, people really, they don't know how to talk to people with Alzheimer's. The early stages, I think, is easier because you're repeating, you're answering the same questions over and over, and there's some memory loss, but it's a lot of repetitiveness in the conversation. So, and that's another reason why I wanted to write this story. Included in it are tips for communication from the Alzheimer's Association that are really, really helpful. The moderate stage, I feel like, is the most difficult for communication. I feel like we want to still reorient like we might do in the early stages. I think there's a lot of denial on caregivers' parts as to where their loved one really is in the disease process, and what they should expect of them or not expect, I guess is a better word. I remember one day when my mom was in the early stages and I was bringing her to different assisted living to see if she liked them here. I remember being in the kitchen with her and saying, Mom, I need to find you a place that has medical staff because you have Alzheimer's disease. And it was like an aha moment for me that day because the look on her face, she just could not process anything I was saying to her or understand that she needed to be in a place with medical staff. And it was just a moment, and I was like, oh my gosh, she has no idea what this is all about. She totally can't process this. And that's just like a part of the process, you go in your denial a little bit and you think they're okay, but they're really not. And that denial keeps you for a little bit, and then you realize, wait a minute, I have to lower my expectations. So, that loss of language in the moderate stage is a big deal, because they are unable to come up with the words that they want to tell you, quite honestly, and they'll come up with words that don't make sense, and the conversations are very confusing. So I feel it's very important that us as parish nurses dealing with our dementia members, because I'm sure you see a great increase in the dementia in your congregation. I know we have. I mean, our congregation is only like 250 members that attend. There's like 400, but and we've seen a great increase in dementia just in our small congregation. So I'm pretty sure you have too. So this communication piece when you're visiting your members, it really is a big deal that you just stay with them if they're in the early stages. And you just keep repeating the same thing over and over, and you just stay in the conversation and you just repeat what you need to repeat, and that you never make them feel like they're not making sense or they're not important. Always wanting them to feel like their conversation and what they're saying is important. The moderate stages, my mother, again, will say things, very confusing conversations. She'll say things like, I want to go home. I want to go see my mother. They're all crazy here. or the conversation won't even make any sense. It'll just be words that I can't even make sense of. So regardless, I acknowledge what she's saying to me. I'll just say things like, "Oh, okay, well that's good." If she says things to me like, "I want to go home and see my mother," I'll say things like, "Well, why don't you wait until you get a good night's sleep, and then we'll go in the morning. I'll come get you." So acknowledging what she's saying to me, go with the conversation, and then redirecting the conversation. So I'll redirect the conversation and say, "How does your back feel?" So I'll redirect the conversation with things like, "How was supper? Did you cook? How's your back feeling?" So that's a great way to just acknowledge the conversation that she's saying to you, and then just redirect it. I'm just going to share a couple of things. Whoops. I'm sharing these slides. I'm hoping you can see them. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the visits with dementia patients. So when you think about the church service, you know that I'm sure yours it can be loud. A lot of times members don't know how to engage in conversation with a forgetful person. So coming to church really can be a big deal, very anxiety provoking for members. So, and sadly, they do tend to just stop coming because of these things. I guess my point here is um, maybe it would be great if you as a parish nurse could spend some time talking with your members about how to communicate so that they're not forgotten and they're not feeling like church is just a place they don't want to be at anymore. So again, they do stop coming because of the embarrassment. Others find it difficult to get to church, physically get to church, so they stop coming. And I have to say, our churches are really not dementia friendly. It's just church is the way it goes, and there's really no room, I guess, for lack of a better word, for somebody with dementia. We have a member who sits a couple pews in front of me that was diagnosed about 2 years ago, and I watch him singing songs, and he has a really, really hard time following along with the songs. The songs tend to change. We have the service we're at as a contemporary service, so it's not the hymns that might be well known. So he has a hard time singing, which you can only imagine what that feels like to be sitting in church and not being able to follow the songs. But interestingly enough, he is able to say the Lord's Prayer. So things in the long-term memory are still there. So it's pretty interesting. So just some facts that people's identity is typically comes from their practices of worship. They identify themselves by their church. And it's important to keep those practices maintained. So some things you could do when you're visiting a member at home, you could read maybe the 21st Psalm or something that you know is very familiar to them. Again, the Lord's Prayer. You might want to buy a couple hymns on your phone that you think they might know that were old hymns or something in their long-term memory. Music is very, very comforting to patients with dementia. I want to leave you with this hotline to the Alzheimer's Association. If you can, write this phone number down, or you can go on alz.org. It's alz.org. So this is a resource for you. This is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you have an instance that you're not sure about, or you maybe had a conversation with one of your members and you're not really sure how that conversation went, if you have a member that you feel isn't safe in their home, this is your resource. It's not just for dementia, it's for different types of Alzheimer's as well. The resource is available, so please pick up the phone and call them. If you're looking for a support group, because you think a family member might benefit from a support group, they'll help you find one. I also facilitate a support group at my church. I've been doing it for about 2 years now. Might be something you want to consider doing, because honestly, it's a great way to bring the community into your congregation. If it's something you're interested in, again, you could call this number. They do require training, so you would have to have someone from the association train you on how to facilitate a support group. But the support groups are very, very meaningful. This book is a great book, A Second Forgetting, Remembering the Power of the Gospel During Alzheimer's Disease. This is also a great resource as well. Okay. So that's pretty much my story. I hope you have a better idea of what a family member goes through when they're dealing with somebody, their loved one, that has any kind of dementia or Alzheimer's. Just wanted to give you a quick picture of what it's like. It's pretty horrible, but I am going to leave you with the joy in Alzheimer's, because I think it's important for you as a nurse and as caregivers, for you to share with caregivers that it's very helpful if you can find the joy. That's what I had to do. Instead of being miserable, I needed to say to myself, where is the joy in this Alzheimer's? So I'll tell you from my own experience where some of the joy is. So my mother didn't have to bury her daughter. My sister passed away unexpectedly about six months ago. My mother had a niece and nephew who died in her 40s that she was very close to, that she didn't have to experience that grief. She doesn't know that her sister, who she was in the same nursing home with, has died from it. And another sister who was out in California that died with it. She doesn't know any of that. That's a ton of grief, isn't it? That my mother didn't have to bear. Things like her religion was very, very strict. She wore her hair in a bun every day. She wore a skirt every day. She didn't watch TV. There was lots of rules with her religion, and she followed every single one of them. And now, none of that matters. I guess my point is, all the things that we think are just so big and so meaningful in our everyday lives, really, they're not. She wears the beads that she wins in bingo. The nurse's aides paint her fingernails. She is more joyful, if that makes any sense. She's all her inhibitions are gone. I know I just watched her whole life feeling like she needed to do certain things, and she really didn't, right? She still loved, regardless of if she has nail polish on her nails. I get a lot of a lot of grief, so to speak, from family members because of choices I made with my mother, because my mother was a big part of our very large family. And a lot of my cousins and aunts and uncles didn't agree with how I was handling her illness. So I got a lot of grief from my family. I also have a lot of family that don't go to visit her. That has really made me angry. So I really had to learn my life lessons in this are lowering my expectations, um, realizing that people are going to make judgments on you regardless, that they haven't walked in your shoes. Um, just realizing that not everybody's comfortable with visiting people in the nursing home. Not everybody's comfortable with how to communicate with somebody with Alzheimer's, and people tend to avoid what they're not comfortable with. So those are some of my lessons, and some of the joys that I find in Alzheimer's. Honestly, like I said, lots of grief my mother didn't have to bear, and she's just funny now. Like she's thankfully going through this process happy. So encouraging members that you deal with to find the joy is really important because there is joy there. It's not all horrible. A lot of it is, but find the joy um, and show them lots and lots of love. So thanks for listening. My contact information is on the LCMS website. And again, my story is there as well. God's blessings on your day.